Next week, I have a meeting for a couple hours over this time frame, so we won't have class per se, even though it's midterm week. I'll make a recording of that week's stuff and send it out, so, but we won't have the face-to-face class. I'll be up and around here, but I just am not available for this time frame during that day. But if you want to stop in earlier in the day or later on in the day with anything, questions or whatever, you sure can, or anytime during the week, excuse me. So just because next week is midterm week, I don't have a specific midterm for this class, right? We're just gonna go over chapter 8 next week and stuff. So no big test or anything for that. So and I think, I can't remember 3 or 4, there's not a big test for that either. There might be a little presentation or something, I can't remember, but anyway, so but looking ahead, it's not due next week, but one of the assignments that would be like due in 2 weeks is a little interview. That helps that covers some of the topics we're gonna go over in chapter 8 that week. So looking at it's got 4 different age groups that is typically like the friend group thing, but if you could find a couple in those age groups, it doesn't have to be in the same one, it can be in different ones. I actually prefer to be in different ones. 3, 6, 5, 9, 7, 12, or 12 and up. You can find a couple of kids to visit with, interview in those age ranges. And then some of the stuff that it talks about in chapter 8 that I'll discuss in the video in regards to friendship concepts, kind of interview them to ask them questions about some of those things, kind of gauge their responses on that. So just a heads up for, you got to find a couple kids to interview if you don't know any or have any or whatever. So it doesn't have to be one. If you can, great, but at least try to get 2. One for each. I will make sure I'm saying this right. You don't have to have one for every age group, but if you can get 2 of those age groups represented, that would be great. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, let's see here. And then also, so on the 16th of October, that's kind of the end, that Sunday after midterm week. If you have any assignments from the first half of the semester that haven't been done yet, that's the last day to take them. Okay. No, not this Sunday, but the next Sunday, the 16th. So like chapter 8, the stuff we'll do next week is not included on that. That'll be at the end of the semester, right? So I think you're pretty good on stuff for the most part, but for this class and then 3 or 4, the online one, same thing with that. We actually try to do that with all of our ed classes. So just a heads up on that. So if you got something that is out or missing, you got a little time to get that done. So any questions on assignments so far yet? You're good with all of them. So yes, yep. So what I will do is just open it up to make corrections. Usually is how I do that. So like for ones that you got wrong, you can go back and review and look at that. That works rather than redoing the whole piece of it. And I'll open it up until the 16th that Sunday, so you got time to complete it by then. So, okay, all right, perfect. Let's see. So chapter 7 quiz for this week, and then kind of the same concept for this last other couple assignments for each week is this. There's this video, of course, and it's talking about the preschoolers at, is that fuzzy to you or not? Okay, all right, maybe it's just my angle here. But there's some preschoolers playing at a sensory table. So a sensory table is like a table that's got either water in it or some other kind of foam or a variety of things. Anyway, so the stuff we'll cover today in regards to social play and some of those things that we are going to talk at, look at, have you kind of focus on this video, what those kids are doing, answer these 3 questions in regards to what's going on there with that. So trying to get you a little bit of engagement through these videos. I know you got observation stuff that you're doing for other classes as well, but all these things kind of connect together at some point, right? So, okay. So let's see, chapter 7, go back to that here, pull that up. So looking at social development and learning, and this is talking about play as a main focus of that. We've got another class, I don't remember if you've taken it yet or not, but play as a focus of learning. Play in the classroom, I can't even remember what the name of it is yet, but play is a big part of early childhood up kind of until kindergarten for the most part. And then maybe you've noticed that it's in your observations, but it's a little bit more academic after that in regards to, Head Start. Have you worked at Head Start, right? Seems like there's more play involved at the Head Start level to some degree. And then you get into that kindergarten, 1st grade setting, and it's more like desks and academics and stuff, right? Rather than still kind of using play as a way to learn. Research does show that even up through 2nd and 3rd grade, play is a good way for those young kids because they're still growing, developing, right? For them to learn. But the academic world, the K-12 setting, kind of has really somewhat shifted away from it. Depends on the teacher and stuff too, a little bit. But anyway, so it can be done, but this chapter specifically is looking at like social skills and development and learning. So because that is an important piece, as you probably know, right, from Head Start, that social skill development. Some kids are great at it, some kids struggle with it. So we'll touch base on some of these things, probably know some of them already, but still looking at those. So looking at some, there are some like gender differences, right, in terms of social play, right? Boys and girls sometimes do things differently, play differently. They gravitate sometimes towards different things that they play with, right? Or even different games that they do. So there's some themes around that. Social grouping, how they group together, how they play together is often different. Even it could be the same game or activity. Sometimes boys and girls will play differently with that. So the vigor of play, meaning how sometimes rough it can get. Boys typically have a tendency to be a little rougher when they're playing. So there's different types of social participation that we'll talk about, right? In regards to what play looks like and how kids get involved with each other or don't get involved with each other. And then it also talks about social status. So I think of that more as like adults, in terms of what your social status is, but that can actually, happen with play as well, depending upon what kids pick up from adults or what they, use in their settings, in their play settings at school as well. So a lot of influences in regards to play, some most positive, some negative with that. So in terms of playing and activities, contributing to social competence for kids, there are social values that they pick up from home, and then also from what we plan and put together at school, and also what they pick up from the other kids. A lot of times parents will, if a child is picking up a behavior, well, they didn't learn that at home, they must have, picked it up at school, or, so those things can happen. Sometimes they don't, but they happen, in other places in the community or at home, a variety of places. So social values are picked up there. Kids can develop that positive self-identity, right? In terms of like self-esteem, right? Being thinking positively of themselves by engaging with others, helping others, participating, being included, all those self-esteem things that we've kind of talked about earlier this semester. really help with that positive self-identity. And we want to definitely, as teachers, push that, as much as possible, the affirmations for students when they're doing things well, and helping others. So interpersonal skills, working with others, right? So inter, working with others, intra is inside, right? So I sometimes still get those mixed up, once in a while, right? But the interpersonal skills in terms of social competence is having that, picking up those skills to play with others, wait their turn, those different pieces that are definitely super, super important. Self-regulation is also important, right? In terms of, we talked about emotions before and regulating emotions, but knowing when to stop doing something, how to react or what they're feeling. Planning and decision making. Cultural competence can mean a variety of things, right? In terms of like what the culture of the classroom is, or as well as like ethnic culture background, right? What do you do in certain situations? How you react sometimes to certain situations. What's the process, the procedure when eating, for example, especially with early childhood, right? Meal times can be a lot different for a variety of kids. So maybe some families pray at home, so when they come to our classroom, maybe they're going to feel like they want to do the same thing or need to, so that's fine if they do that. Just a variety of things that families do or communities even do in terms of cultural competence. And then emotional intelligence is important. So that can fall in lines of like children understanding like how others are feeling or why are they reacting that way. They may not totally understand, but they could tell that, they're mad at me for doing that. I don't know why, but they're understanding some of those components. So the older they get, the more emotional intelligence they pick up and a better understanding of that, which leads to a better social competence, right? In terms of working good or working better with others. So, so a lot of different types of play is one of the important things that we kind of take a look at, right? And we plan some activities in regards to that. So we have the exploratory component, right? That makes sense, or actually makes sense, but that's common sense. You're gonna find things out, figure things out. You're gonna explore a little bit. There's lots of different ways to potentially do that. So you can play with objects, right? So there's a lot of different ways that you can do that in regards to objects. There can be a specific purpose for them. Right? So I think of maybe like puzzles, for example. There is a specific purpose for puzzles. They go a certain way. You might be teaching kids shapes or just the ability to put patterns together, recognize patterns. You might have blocks. Blocks can be used to build things. They can be used for imagination. They can represent other things. So there's a variety of ways that we can use objects and that kids do use objects, right? So there's construction, right? Building things, putting things together, taking things apart. Movement play, obviously that kind of makes sense, right? Where you're just freeze tag outside or doing any activity, something where you're moving. Practice would obviously be one where you are learning a new skill. You're taking that time to try to develop it, try to master it, right? And you got some, or you have some opportunities for kids to fail without like being punished or getting a bad grade, and things like that. So practice play is important. Rough and tumble play. So this is one sometimes that is a little bit of a gray area, right? Because people or kids sometimes it can be confused with like somebody being mad or aggressive, so rough and tumble, has its place, but we have to be careful, with that. We don't let it get too far as teachers. So we just have to make sure in those situations that we're like monitoring it and observing it. But then of course there's gameplay, right? Anytime there's gameplay, there's rules of some sort, right? Maybe you remember as a young kid playing that you might have been playing a game and then it seemed like there was always like out of recess or something that other kids were changing the rules or modifying it as you went, and let's do this now, or different things, which can lead to some disagreements, right, between kids. So, but when you got those gameplay, they always have some kind of rules and organization with that. The dramatic play or pretend skills, that would go back to like the dramatic area of, you know, a classroom where there's objects, you know, clothes that they can wear or different props that they can for being creative and pretending, making up things as they're going along. And then the socio-dramatic play is more like story-like, where they're creating not really a dialogue, right? But there's a pattern of beginning, a middle, a end type thing. The dramatic play is kind of more of like, oh, let's play grocery store, or let's play, you know, house, or some of those kind of old school traditional ones that I can only think of at the moment. But the socio-dramatic has more of a storyline component to it. So there's a video here I want to watch that talks about play, right? So the kind of those areas that we just went through and talked about. And then we'll try to answer a couple questions here through that and just see how that works out. We can come up with some ideas and stuff on that. So should be able to hear it through the speakers because I tried it and it worked. So we'll find out.
Between the ages of 2 and 5, children's social interactions become increasingly reciprocal and coordinated, which is reflected in their play. Children's play can be divided into 4 categories, ranging from least to most socially complex: non-social activity, parallel play, associative play, and cooperative play.
Non-social activity includes both solitary play and onlooker behavior, in which a child plays alone or simply watches another child play without participating. Parallel play is not interactive. Children play side by side in close proximity to each other, but are focused on their own rather than the other's activities. In associative play, children will share materials, and they may even organize their play around a common theme, such as cooking in the kitchen, but there is no coordinated purpose or goal. Cooperative play, by contrast, is goal-focused. It is organized group activity, both interactive and reciprocal. Children plan and assign roles and work together to achieve a common purpose.
Around the age of 4 or 5, there is a developmental shift in the type of play in which children engage. 4 and 5-year-olds begin to demonstrate constructive play, drawing pictures or working on puzzles in pairs or groups, purposefully creating and constructing something together. In dramatic play, children experiment with new roles and possible situations, acting out both everyday and imaginary roles. This type of play involves advances in cognition, perspective taking, and communication skills.
That's a dress. It's beautiful. It's a big pumpkin dress with pumpkins on. And flowers. I know how to tie, so I'm going to tie it like this. I found another, and it might be her size. Maybe it is a cook. It's the wrong way. There. But guys, you're done.
Yay. So a few of those things that we talked about, right? And then also these like the non-social, parallel, associative, cooperative play. Some of those, all those plays that we talked about fit into those different categories, right? So the first question here says a class of 2.5-year-olds, okay, many of whom engage in parallel play. What might this look like in the classroom? So if we have 2.5-year-olds with parallel play, what does that kind of look like?
They're playing next week.
Right, yep. From your experience, like 2.5, 3-year-olds, what kind of toys, activities, stuff are they engaged in? Do you have experience with those ones? I don't. Okay, sure. Yep. Yeah, and that kind of goes back to like children being, especially that age and even a little bit older, like egocentric, right? Where their world is their world and they don't really pay a lot of attention to other things happening or going on around them. So, excuse me. So the 4.5-year-olds, engaging in dramatic play, simple forms, ideas of what that might look like in the classroom.
There were conversations that they like to have now, realize situation.
Right. Yep. Perfect. Okay, good. And you can kind of see that a little bit in like these girls at the end there. Right? Oh, it's a beautiful dress. I think that's, you know, probably like you said, talking about or talking like their parents or somebody, family members that they've heard do that before. So, okay, good. So looking at rough and tumble play, when and where that happens, and we kind of want to set some boundaries, right, with that. Safe zones it talks about in regards to like one areas where you can do that, right? So in the classroom is a little bit more difficult because of obviously that limited space, but also like thinking about, you know, so like these tables aren't so bad with plastic rounded corners, right? But some of the older tables that have, you know, wooden and the sharp edges, you know, or, you know, those places obviously are off limits. As well as if someone, you know, in regards to a safe zone, if someone's feeling uncomfortable or if a child is feeling uncomfortable playing in that whatever activity they might be doing, that they have the opportunity to disengage or to take themselves out of that situation, which would be part of the verbal cue to start and stop. One for us to give start and stop cues, but also for students to say what that cue might be for them to go out of that. So not just for necessarily this, but like the rough and tumble piece, but what are some cues that you've seen or maybe used before to get kids' attention when they're really engaged in an activity? Not just verbally, but other things that, you know, the things that teachers do to grab their attention.
I want the she was saying 1, 2, 3, eyes on me.
Yep.
Or then 1, 2, eyes on me.
And the kids say that back to 1, 2, right? Yeah. So a lot of teachers will have those pieces, right? Or those sayings like that, or they might flick the lights once or twice, or just a variety of things where rather, especially if they're all engaged in some activity, playing, doing something where they're not really focused on the teacher or each other or anything, rather than, hey, trying to hollering at their attention, they know that signal piece, and then it gives them some time to focus and stuff. So, which would be very similar to this piece as well. So, yeah, stay close to players or when they're doing this activity. Rough and tumble here talks about imaginary villains or like good guy, bad guy, you know, type thing that they might be playing, or even like at recess for certain things, you know, like if you've got groups of kids that want to play, they like throw the football around or some kind of activity that's going to be a little bit probably rough and tumble. Where you could potentially have kids get upset at each other, somebody get tackled, or, you know, some of those different things. So we just have to stay close, keep an eye on them. So part of us, what we can do also, or what we should do as teachers, is comprehend what children are doing, right, in terms of their playing, right? Because one, it will give us a good clue into their development a little bit. And it'll also give us a clue into what their interests might be to help us build a relationship with them or plan activities that they have experience in to help scaffold their learning. But then also might give us a clue into if there are some issues, you know, happening that we might be able to pick up some of those components as well. So helping kids to work through some of the social like competencies that they might be lacking in. So one here, for example, rule construction and understanding. So it talks about explicit and implicit rules. So explicit, like ones that are like said and observed for sure that you like put in place. Implicit would be ones that are kind of like maybe don't say them, but it's just kind of assumed. So sometimes kids don't understand those implicit rules. So we might have to explain that or help them understand it a little bit better. Time and support to develop their own rules. So engaging in activity, right? Or starting an activity. If we don't set some rules in place, we might ask the kids, okay, what do you think should be, you know, some guidelines or boundaries, you know, for this activity, or when you're, you know, if they have like, oh, I can't think of the word, free play time or free choice, you know, for example, in activities, you know, can you do that the whole time? Should you share? How do you do that? So another thing that's important to work with the kids on is entering and maintaining play, right? Some kids just boom right there into a group when they're doing things, right? And so teaching kids how to ask, you know, if they can join or enter or play with something. Those are appropriate things we want to help the kids with in terms of helping them to understand a little bit about it too. So peer communication is super important, right? In terms of kids sharing their feelings or their thoughts in regards to what they want to play, how they want to play, and also vice versa, you know, on that. I think we've talked about and seen some video on, you know, kids getting upset at other kids, and then kind of the teacher helping them like explain why they're upset to the other kid because they didn't know, you know. So communication is super important between the kids. So there's some different types here. They talk about like procedural. There's some transformative components like switching from one activity to another, or even within an activity, you know, changing maybe a game or from one direction to another direction. You know, maybe they're playing, I don't know, they're playing catch with the football, and all of a sudden they decided they're going to change directions to playing 500 or, you know, some random game. Anyway, there's some procedural and transformal changes or communications that are important. How they end something, how they terminate it, you know, and finish it up. Do they just, you know, stop and leave everything? Hopefully not. If they do, we have to teach them how to finish things out, put things away, you know, and transition to the next setting. So there's communication there, not only between the kids or the students, but between us and the adults and the students as well. So humor, okay, so that's a big important probably factor for our schools and for our students, and I think me personally is that humor, right? Kids enjoy laughing and enjoy having fun. So excuse me, that can be also part of, you know, kids having fun, or I don't want to say making fun of like other kids or situations, but just acting goofy or telling jokes. I mean, to try to get a laugh and stuff. So as long as they're using that humor in a positive way, right, is a good way to do that. So we sometimes have to have a challenge though, or have to try to understand or remember the child's humor as compared to us as adults a little bit. So it's easy to forget a lot of things, what things were like when we were younger and littler, in terms of what their humor might be like compared to ours. So things that we can do in regards to helping out, enhancing, supporting, etc. So the big thing on top there, observe, right? So we want to make sure we're trying to see things that are happening, observe potential issues. I mean, we can't see everything, but we might be able to see things that might be leading towards a little bit of an issue, and try to intervene with that as much as possible. Get involved, right? There's going to be some times where we can get involved and play and be engaged and help them, direct them, guide them in sometimes maybe a different route, or maybe try to get them to explore something in a little bit more depth to really learn. So because play is not always just to play is to really help learn, right, as well. So which if we're involved, sometimes we can get to that mature level of play a little bit too, and help them to grow and develop a little bit. If we've got games, right, or if they're going to do games, teaching them the rules or demonstrating the rules is super important, and how to play certain things, because you might have kids that are very good at like picking up on how to do things, right? Things come easy for them, and then you're going to have kids that have it takes a little bit more for them to process or understand or remember. So we can demonstrate things, we can remind them, show them multiple times, then that's better for those kids that might struggle a little bit. Because then if we don't do it as much, we do it one time and kids don't pick up on it, you get those kids that do pick up on it and they're going and they want to play and they're doing stuff, and then you have the kids that kind of, I don't know what to do, and then some of these kids get frustrated and mad and stuff. So trying to find that balance and helping the kids, definitely important. So influencing, which we've kind of talked about, but talks here about ulterior conversations. So we might hear kids when they're in activity talking about maybe they're playing together and they're talking. Sometimes we might interject to try to steer them a certain direction, or ask a question to get them thinking about something different. So we can kind of form, shape, push things in a different direction sometimes, if we really want to, and if we see them maybe going down a different path that they shouldn't be. But a lot of storytelling can definitely be involved, and we can be engaged in that as well. I used to kind of just make up random stories sometimes about stuff, like with my own kids, and just to kind of get them thinking, or also problem solving, or really questioning, was that real? Did that really happen? Things like that. So storytelling can be a good way to help kids develop that play, and also maybe just spark them on a new storyline if they're doing some dramatic play stuff as well. So. Okay. So using development to help children play. So encourage children who demonstrate all the skills to play independently. So if you got kids who can, those kids I talked about that are pick things up very quickly sometimes, right? Can they do some things on their own independently, while maybe we work with a group of kids, or maybe a kid who is struggling with some of those skills, right? To demonstrate and do some more one-on-one working with them. So intervene with children who don't understand, meta communications and strategies for directing play. Meta communications is more of that higher level thinking, problem solving sometimes. And so if kids are struggling with that, we want to help them, with that. It might be breaking it down into simpler questions or simpler tasks or directions for them to be able to complete the task, or to be able to be engaged in the play for that activity. So when we have kids with special needs, so this could be maybe some kids with some physical limitations, right? Or even some behavioral or cognitive limitations. What are their abilities? What can they do? And then once we understand what their abilities are, we can modify activities, games, settings for them to be able to be involved and be engaged. So especially if we're talking about, as with the social skills or the social competencies piece, those kids that have a hard time working in groups, entering groups, sharing, not sharing, regulating their emotions, they can sometimes be left out, right? Because of their inability to regulate that stuff, other kids I don't want to play with them because they always take my stuff, or they just barge in and they don't let us have a say, or those different things, right? So even though it's not probably any fault of their own, other kids are just go away, and then they get kind of left out and they feel bad and stuff. So we want to make sure that other kids understand, how to include them, how to let them know if they're upset that the other kid took their stuff or whatever it is. But so the peer support is important as much as possible, but we have to be engaged in teaching their peers and the other students the appropriate way to do things. So, and then of course, child interests of the kid, as much as we can include for activities, makes them a little bit more engaged as well. So. The time and the repetition for the child to achieve success, like I was talking about before, in terms of demonstrating or modeling certain ways to do things. Sometimes with kids with learning disabilities or cognitive disabilities, it takes more repetition, right? More repetition. I don't know if people have talked, or maybe if it was research or something I read, but it takes like 7 times, do something like 7 times for it to become like a habit. But to unlearn that habit, it takes like 40 times or something around there. So it's easier to learn something and you do it over and over than it is to break, a habit or something. But for some kids, it takes 10, 15, 20 times to learn something, or even to be able to remember how to do something or pick up a certain skill. So then anytime we can modify the environment or use equipment, for kids to help them learn a certain skill or do something more appropriately, we want to try to use that if we have the resources and the equipment for those things. So part of one of the big components with our with our young kids is sharing that information with the families for their social skills or social development, because there were probably things happening, especially preschool, Head Start, with maybe a lot of kids first time exposed to larger groups of kids working together, right? That there might be behaviors we're seeing at school or lack of skills at school that they're not seeing at home, because maybe it's a smaller family, they don't have a lot of other siblings or something like that. So we definitely want to share both the successes and the struggles that kids are having as much as possible. So and then you might talk about things that you're doing in the classroom, right? With play, activities, centers, information you're learning, and maybe provide some suggestions on things that they can do at home as well. And so communicating with families also, I think we've talked about this in this class, depends upon like where you're at, what organization you're with, right? Whether it's Head Start or it's a K-12 school, or how you can communicate, if you can communicate through email or have a website or share text messages or whatever it might be to communicate with them. Sometimes you see families almost daily, right, if they have to pick up their kids, but other times not if they're at the bus, and so it just kind of depends. Depends on what setting you're in, but find a way to communicate with them: phone, postcard, email, text, whatever it might be, and what you're comfortable with, as well. So it's easy to say just send a text message, but if you're not, as a teacher, you have to decide whether you're comfortable like sharing your cell phone, right, or your home phone, or whether if you have an office phone to call that, because you might have parents that might call you or text you all the time or at all times of the day or night, on things. So we have to have a personal life as teachers a little bit as well, too, right? So lastly, a few things, of course, try to avoid just looking at academic components, right? The social skill piece is super important as well. I know there are, and maybe I've also talked about this as well, but some and it'd be interesting to see in terms of your observation with kindergarten, that I've heard several teachers from different schools talk about the struggles they've had with their kindergarten class this year in regards to not knowing some social skill stuff. I have a sophomore in high school that followed for their student council. They go down and help with recess at the elementary school in Mobridge. And I think it's kindergarten mostly he helps with, but he's was telling the teacher or somebody they don't know how to play. They don't know how to play a lot of games. They're just running all over and throwing things. I mean, he said just kind of crazy. And other teachers that I visited with said, some of the kids coming in are very low, very, very low, more than they've ever seen academically, which is probably related to some COVID closure stuff. So it'd be kind of interesting to see how things kind of play out socially and academically for the group of this kindergarten, first grade ish age group of kids in terms of that. But So it might be a little more focus on social skill components. I guess that's kind of where I'm going with that is that it's okay to take time for social skill development over academic development, because lack of social skills and understanding of how to do things can hurt kids, I think, a lot longer than the academic piece. If kids understand the social component, I think they can pick up on those academic skills, you know, faster if they understand how to do some of those things. So we have the two ends of the spectrum here on this: too many restrictions and then not enough restrictions, right? So it can't be a free-for-all, and it can't be everything scripted every single minute, you know, of the day. There's got to be some balance in between that. So ignoring play or becoming too engaged in play yourself, right? So having an hour and a half of free play and then not paying any attention to them at all is not good. But then being engaged with, say, a small group of kids for 45 minutes of play and then not paying attention to the others is too much. So again, everything is kind of a balance with that. So squelching creative use of materials. So meaning like, hey, you're not supposed to play with that way. You know, I mean, if it's dangerous, yes, we would obviously shut it down, but who's to say that you can't use, you know, stuff that is toys or materials that are designed for a certain thing, like you can't use it for something totally different, right? So it's good to have imagination and let kids do that as long as it's a safe way to do that. So those are the big things. And then of course the social support pyramid, right? So on the foundational level here in regards to social development, their children's play styles, their themes, their cultural differences, supporting that, especially if you have a very diverse classroom, what are some different ways they're playing? What are some different ways that they're engaging with each other? And maybe kids can learn a few things, in terms of some of their differences. But we want to make sure we have enough time, space, and materials for the kids to help that. And so not too much though, like not too much time. And so having a little bit of restriction for that. The space is kind of hard to manage. We don't have really a say in like what our classroom looks like or how big or how small it is. So if the space is limited in our classroom, are there other places that we can go to work on like social skills or social skill development? Out on a playground is a good place for social skill development because there's a lot of opportunity for cooperation and entering groups, leaving groups, all those components. So, and then helping kids decide, or we decide when to intervene, when not to intervene, right? How we're going to do that, helping kids understand when to step in into a group, or helping them to understand when to intervene with a situation that might be going on between two people or two of their peers. So teaching and coaching is mostly on our end, but we can help kids with that intervention, and we can help them understand when to step in and speak up and realize when things aren't right. So okay, that is it in a nutshell. Clear as mud, or questions? Or okay, all right. So yeah, just those. Oh, don't need that. Sure, this chapter 7 quiz, and then that one little assignment with that video, and then no face-to-face class next week, right? I will be up here, but in meetings. So, but if you need to stop in, let me know. So, or anytime during the week, for that matter. So, I'm gonna stop the recording.